For those of you who don't know, I write an article for an online magazine called Rocker, and for my latest article, I had the good fortune of being able to interview my friend and multi-Grammy award-winning mastering engineer Robert Hadley. Thought it would be cool to share some clips that had to do with the article with you folks here on my YouTube channel. I started off by asking Robert what a mastering engineer does.
It's pretty basic. You need a mastering engineer to get your mix in the format that people can play outside of a recording studio. Back in the day, everybody had LPs.
Right.
When you mixed, you didn't mix to an LP.
You mixed the tape.
You mixed the tape. You mixed,
And no one played a reel.
Nobody played a reel. I mean, not in that aspect. I mean, they had reel-to-reels, but not the one that was actually record. That you mixed to and had it going. So you had to get that off of there and onto this format.
Right.
Recording studios did not invest in those lathes to get it on vinyl for you.
Right.
And so mastering rooms were born. Generally, they were attached to a label. The place I worked, the Mastering Lab, was essentially the first independent place.
Right.
That was not attached to a label, not attached to... Yeah, right.
So originally it was, you got this reel of tape with a mix on it, and you had to get it from tape to vinyl. And that's what mastering engineers did. And along the way, you made adjustments to make sure it sounded good on vinyl.
Exactly. That was also your last chance to tweak the sound of your product in the overall in the overall world, like you would on a stereo to highs, lows, but in more detail than that.
Right.
So it was we got it to that format. You would take a ref, take it home and listen to it. Hey, cut number 4 sounds a little dull to number 3 and number blah blah blah. So we would go back in, do some EQ adjustments, get another lacquer ref. You would listen to that generally.
Right.
It was good. Then the lacquer master would be prepared. It would go to the plant, and you get vinyl.
Right. So then the digital era happened, and vinyl disappeared, and then mastering kind of changed in terms of, you were still preparing stuff for a format, but now, since people can, as you said, you can burn like CDs and DVDs on your computer
today,
now.
Right.
Today, not then.
Yeah. When that transition from LP to CD happened, the sonic part of it, EQ-wise, and is the same. Is still to this day, 75%. I mean, the assembly and the delivery and all that stuff is a 25% of what it really. And especially today, I'm going to be honest with you. Mixes need help. They're not. It's rare that you're going to find somebody that's going to just throw up the mix, get it done, and all right, let's put it out.
Looking at the whole idea of multiple formats, which didn't really exist until the 70s. There were multiple formats, but for all intents and purposes, everyone bought vinyl until the 70s, and then you had 8-track and 8-cassette. And 8-track disappeared quickly for any number of reasons. And then through the 80s, it was either bought vinyl or you bought cassette. Mm-hmm. And I think it's pretty much true that if you really cared about how your stuff sounded, you bought vinyl.
Absolutely.
Because cassette sounded horrible. Mm-hmm. The only advantage to buying cassette was that it was small, it was cheap, you could put it in your car, but it sounded like crap.
Car and Walkman.
Yeah.
The cassette.
That's what
the cassette was the grandfather to the iPod.
One of the things I guess I'm really interested about is, was there ever a point where you mastered specifically for, like, in the days when it was either vinyl or cassette, and I know you weren't necessarily involved in that, but you worked for a guy who was involved in every kind of format there ever was.
Sure.
Did they specifically master for cassettes? Were there 2 different jobs done, one for vinyl, one for cassette? It was just they did one for vinyl and then transferred.
Well, it was. It was the same for all 3 back then.
Okay, so
because the levels that we're dealing with today did not exist. There was the only difference for the CD was that it ran through an A to D converter, to another delivery system. But if
so you mastered it, essentially, you were mastering it for the vinyl, and then the other 2 formats, the CD, as long as the CD sounded good and the vinyl sounded good, you were fine. Right. You didn't do a separate job for that, and the cassette, who cares?
Sure.
That just is what it is.
That is what it is. Not true today.
Right.
Not true today.
because
very different.
And that's the next piece of the puzzle is when CDs took over completely from vinyl. Now we don't have to worry anymore about vinyl had certain limitations to it, which if you could just kind of talk about the differences there.
Number one, level.
Right.
Number two, CD came out, and all of a sudden, it made for longer albums.
Right.
There was no longer a need to self-edit yourself. You had time limitations, and if you didn't want to abide by time limitations in vinyl, you went to more sides.
Right.
Hence the wall. The wall was a double album to 4 sides. Everything they wanted to go, had to go. It had to be there. So it was a 4-side album. But more cost. It brings up ideally you want to go 18 minutes aside 33, 12-inch.
Right.
18 minutes is ideal. You can go a little bit longer, but you sacrifice level.
Right.
Because you need to have room for the grooves to have the space between that they need, so they don't overcut and crosstalk and all this kind of stuff. So it was more than just the compatibility factor of that producers and artists were like, oh wow, this we can put more.
Yeah.
More.
Yeah.
It was just like smorgasbord was open, and there you go. And it was like, okay, cool, let's do this.
And the thing that that's made it out into the public consciousness is things got louder.
Well, things eventually it took a while for it to get where we are now. There was the whole '80s and through half the '90s. You grab a CD,
it's much quieter.
Because there was none of the L2s and L3s and whatever plugins,
digital
all that stuff. Yeah, you didn't beat up your converters, and the converters that were back then too are let's face it, inferior to what is made today too. Right. So you couldn't push those ones like you can push these. They're made, but to handle better level. So we push our converters now, and then after conversion we get more level because nobody wants to turn up their volume knob. You got a volume knob on everything you own.
Yeah. If you had a cassette or vinyl or even analog reel-to-reel tape, there was a noise floor there. There was a hiss factor, crackle, or whatever. Sure. So you wanted to put
above it.
The idea was to put as much level as you could on those formats so that you were masking that noise floor, that whatever noise that the format inherently made on its own. And with digital, there is one, but it is so minuscule, it almost doesn't matter.
Right, exactly.
So there's no actual need to make things as loud as they are now from a technical standpoint like there was before.
Right. For me, the best-sounding record of the 90s is Jellyfish Belly Button.
Oh, which sounds amazing.
You have to turn it up.
Yep.
If you turn it up and you get it to the level you're used to listening to today, it's going to blow anything out of the water.
Yeah. And
it doesn't have any of the extra digital stuff. You get the vinyl of it and you get the CD of it and you match your preamp's level to your CD level and you put it on, they're going to sound pretty close to the same.
Yeah. The stuff you have to...
You just have to level match. It's a digital level and analog level. It's a totally different thing for LP.
Reach for your volume knob.
Reach for your volume knob. Everything has it.
But then the interesting thing is, as everybody competed to get levels higher and higher and higher on digital, even though there is a technical limit to how loud you can make a digital recording, you can literally go to a certain point and no further. But in order to increase perceived loudness, we just kept compressing. So the quietest thing in the recording became louder.
Oh yeah, your average just came way up.
So your average level came up.
Your peaks were not necessarily any louder. It's just your average and everything. And in there now you're bringing up your noise too.
Yeah. Yep.
So you have a good signal and a noise, and now all of a sudden we want to bring our noise up to our signal, and it's just like, okay, here we go.
And to kind of put a bow on the whole format subject, we now, we got to the point where digital stuff got as loud as we could possibly make it, and then vinyl started coming back underneath, and now we can't do, we're back to, if you want to do something for vinyl, you cannot master it the way you would master it for a digital thing, because vinyl, in the first place, couldn't take that kind of level. And then we got into this Candyland world of we can do whatever we want with it.
If I master something, it comes in, I do what I do for CD, because that's where all the EQ decisions are made and all this kind of thing. They take the ref, they listen to it, it's great. Now we want to go vinyl. Two things can happen. We can use the actual CD master, but you have to turn it way down. And turning it way down will make it fit on a disc, but you still have some of the artifacts of all that limiting. So
we're getting, that actually cuts right at the heart of the original question I was asked, which is, in that case, if someone has it mastered for a CD, but then wants a vinyl done, and all you do is turn it down and then get it to cut on a vinyl lathe, then the vinyl is not going to sound as, it's not optimal. It's not optimal. The optimal one is going to be the CD.
The optimal way to do the two formats now is essentially it's two different it's two different animals.
Twice.
You basically do.
So we've covered the vinyl, we've covered the cassette. The last piece is, so now you've got this option, even if you go straight digital, you're either going to be listening to some sort of, compressed and decompressed audio file, an MP3, an AAC, whatever.
FLAC,
yeah. Or you're listening to a, basically CD quality, uncompressed audio file, which is much bigger, which is why most people want to use MP3s or AACs, because they
sending them around,
they can carry, a zillion of them in their iPod instead of, 100 of them.
Sure.
And then there's the really high-res stuff that's done at, 9624, 19224, whatever. That, again, gigantic file sizes, so you can carry tens of those.
Instead of saying high-res, higher than 44/116.
And 44/116, again, for the audiences, that's
CD.
16. 16-bit. 44 1 kilohertz, 16-bit is CD quality.
If you pop a CD in, that's what you're listening to.
And when we master, usually we're mastering for that format still. Whether it's going to end up on a CD or on iTunes or in whatever digital delivery format, we master to make sure it's optimized for 16-bit
44.1.
And so then what's interesting is, and I would never have even thought about this, but there's no, I don't know of any situation where you want to master for an MP3.
Well, my take on it right now is MP3s, AACs are born of that sample rate and bit rate.
Right.
So the better sounding 44/116 that you use to create your compressed file, the better that compressed file will be.
Right. And because you, as a mastering engineer, I, as a producer or mix engineer, have absolutely zero control over what options people select in iTunes when they make those compressed files. We have no way of optimizing what we do for that. Whereas we know if we optimize for CD, a CD is a CD is a CD.
Well,
they're all going to be the same bit rate and sample rate, so we can make decisions for that format.
For that format, exactly. If you have a crappy sounding 44/116 from CD, the compressed file of that is going to sound worse.
Right.
Not better. The better sounding that disc, the better sounding your AAC or MP3.
And then the final piece of that is the high-res stuff, like 9624, 19224. Right. Do you then master for that format and then do a separate job for CDs, or do you just downsample it for the CD?
No, it's a separate transfer. I've had clients that wanted it both ways. They wanted it just like I did for the album.
Right.
They just wanted it higher resolution. So that meant running it through every single piece of gear, the digital limiting, the converter level stayed up and all that stuff. Then there's another, if you want to call it a high-resolution version, do you want the high-resolution version to then be treated like the vinyl cutting master?
Right.
Relax all the level, take everything off of it.
Take advantage of
everything that you can do. Turn your volume knob up and let everything do what it does, It's another creative thing to think about if you want to go out into high-resolution stuff. And I think that's why things are going to start coming down, even for CD, because they're going to get used to listening to this stuff. And if 44/116 is going to stay alive, then it's going to have to stay alive. And
as
now
the
higher resolution is going to mold what this lower resolution stuff is going to become.
As opposed to now where we got the sort of, we go with the CD because it's the middle of the road and we can go up or down from there.
Right.
But as the high-res stuff becomes more popular, then that becomes what we optimize everything for, and then come down to the lower two.
Right, exactly. Because I honestly, I don't think CD's going anywhere.
Right.
I don't think it's going to go away. There's too much hardware out there.
Yeah.
There's more CD hardware out there than there ever was for cassette.
Yeah. Absolutely true.